The Discovery Institute is out with a new video claiming that the fossil record disproves evolution. I think it is an example of a particular method of pseudoscience, cherry picking, whereby tons of evidence against your position are ignored, and you focus on one slice of evidence that is ambiguous or less well understood, and claim that that slice of evidence tears the whole theory down, all the while offering no alternative explanation. Let's take a look. Okay, this is how the video starts.
Did you know that Charles Darwin knew about the key issue in his theory that doesn't add up? Did you know that he was troubled by the fact that an entire field of scientific study opposes the key tenets of evolution? Yes, he sure was, and although he was hoping that future discoveries would fix his problem, the evidence that emerged shattered that hope into 1,000 pieces. Join me for this video to learn why Darwin was spot on in his doubts and find out what this means for the theory of evolution.
So Lukas claimed that a whole field of scientific study opposes the key tenets of evolution. He's talking about the fossil record, and he's wrong. Fossils are great evidence for evolution. They weren't as good evidence in Darwin's day. And it's true the record does not highlight the extreme incrementalism that Darwin envisioned it would. But today the fossil record is, overall, very strong evidence for evolution. Today we have transitional fossils galore. We have detailed incremental evidence for transitions between fish and tetrapods, land animals to whales, dinosaurs to birds, and of humans from a last common ancestor with chimpanzees, and on and on and on. We even see things like turtles with half a shell, just a top or bottom, and other things that opponents of evolution say are not possible. Moreover, we find fossils of particular creatures in the geographic locations we would expect. So what is Lukas going to do? He's going to cherry pick, which is a tool in the arsenal of pseudoscience. He is going to ignore all of that and focus on the Cambrian Explosion. He starts by laying out the following background. Darwin hypothesized that the fossil record would reveal loads of transitional fossils in an extremely gradual pattern. In his day, it did not. Darwin predicted future discoveries would fill in the gaps, but Lukas claims the gaps have not been filled.
Have these hopes come true? Nope. On the contrary, the fossil evidence that has surfaced has made Darwin's problem much more severe, as we're about to see.
So he's going to ignore all the evidence that has come to light. Instead, he explains what a phyla is.
The term phyla, singular phylum, refers to divisions in the biological classification system. The phyla constitute the highest or widest categories of biological classification in the animal kingdom, with each exhibiting a unique architecture, organizational blueprint, or structural body plans.
Then he points out that many of the phyla appear in the Cambrian Explosion.
The animal kingdom is usually organized into 35 different phyla, and the known fossil record features animals representing about 27 of those 35 phyla. Of the 27 phyla featured in the fossil record, 20 make their first and sudden appearance within one single geological time period called the Cambrian era.
Then he argues that the fossil record of the Cambrian, or actually the Pre-Cambrian, does not show how these phyla developed.
Without evidence of fossilized forms in older strata, which could be considered their evolutionary precursors.
I think this is incorrect, or at least misleading. Precursors to animals that appear during the explosion phase appear in the record in the period before the explosion. Examples include small shelly fauna, which are precursors to more modern brachiopods, and minute spiral shells made by primitive mollusks, which are precursors to tiny stem group clams and gastropods that followed later during the explosion. Also, we have tracks that infer jointed legs shortly before the explosion when trilobites appeared. So the one gap that Lukas is highlighting really isn't as much of a gap as he makes it out to be. He is ignoring evidence. He then goes on to point out that the explosive part of the Cambrian was only 10 million years or less.
The time window in which the 20 Cambrian phyla show up is far smaller and has been calculated to cover no more than 10 million years. In fact, an MIT geochronologist has calculated that at least 16 completely new phyla appear within no more than 6 million years of the Cambrian era.
The implication is that evolution couldn't have happened that quickly, but there are reasons to think it did. There are at least 4 potential explanations. Number 1, the mass extinction prior to the explosion. There was an ice age and also a change in the carbon content of the oceans. The forms that were left had smaller populations, which were likely more isolated geographically, and a wide open competitive landscape to grow into. This is consistent with the initially sparse fossil record prior to the explosion, and then the explosive growth and diversification. Indeed, the length of time between the extinction event and the proliferation of new species in the explosion is not unusual in relation to other extinction events. Number 2 is oxygen levels. Prior to the explosion, there was a significant increase in the oxygen levels of the oceans, which gave a big boost to animal life. Number 3, it turns out that the vast majority of species that existed during the Cambrian were arthropods. It turns out, as has been discovered in evolutionary developmental biology, arthropods have the potential to evolve and diversify much quicker than other types of animals. Number 4, an arms race between predators and prey seems to have been raging, and this can lead to quick evolution. And there are other potential reasons as well. And finally, remember that 6 to 10 million years is still a long time. Our last common ancestor with chimps was in that range too. Anyway, he then goes on to discuss some neat aspects of trilobites, and then says,
but it's important to point out that in the 100 plus years that have passed since then, paleontologists have consistently encountered the exact same picture around the world.
Is he now finally going to talk about the rest of the fossil record? Nope. What he goes on to say here is that in the last 100 years, we have other Cambrian finds and they tell the same story. I think that is generally true, actually. Talking about the last 100 years, he says,
the science of paleontology has, like any other scientific discipline, made huge leaps in the past century. And there is no escaping the fact that what we're confronted with when we look at the fossil record is an explosion of animal forms within virtually no time at all, while the interminable number of intermediate forms with which every geological formation is supposed to be charged continue to be conspicuously absent.
In case you're wondering, he is still talking about the Cambrian. And his claim about no transitional forms is suspect, as I've laid out earlier. Then he makes an argument I'm not sure I fully understand.
Yet, that's not even the half of it when you consider that some of the fossils that have been discovered after Darwin by Walcott and others exhibit body plans that weren't even known when The Origin of Species was published.
So some of the more recent Cambrian discoveries have body plans that were not known by Darwin. Okay, what's the huge significance? Well, he tries to clarify.
It's not just that the interminable number of intermediate forms of the animals known to Darwin have not been found. Instead, what has been found are entirely new animal forms exhibiting body plans and anatomical structures which Darwin didn't even know to exist, and they too appear suddenly and without any precursory forms preceding them in the fossil record.
Let's look at that statement carefully. Notice the word interminable. That means endless. So Darwin thought there would be an array of fossils with infinitesimal differences. That's not quite what we see. Well, okay, just because Darwin 160 years ago wasn't perfect in his understanding doesn't mean evolution is false. And as for the new fossils with new body plans appearing suddenly without precursor, he's now just repeating himself and inferring he's making a new argument. So to summarize, Lukas ignores the vast majority of the fossil record, which is better understood, and then tries to poke holes in the little bit that is not as well understood. In poking those holes, he ignores good evidence and explanations, so the flaws he says he is exposing don't really exist so much. He then uses the small slice to cast doubt on the whole enterprise, and all without offering any alternative hypothesis. This is cherry picking, and a God of the Gaps argument as well, actually. Does it qualify as pseudoscience? I think so. What do you think?